Okay, you're now live, Chair. Thank you.
Welcome to this meeting of the Economy and Growth Committee. I'm Councillor Edward Siddall, the Chair of the committee. I would like to inform everyone present at this meeting that it will be broadcast live to the internet via the Council's website and be capable of repeat viewings. The images and sound recordings may be used for training purposes within the Council. In order to ensure that the meeting is managed effectively, can everyone please keep to the following guidelines for speaking? Councillors should only use the raise hand function to request to speak, and only speak when invited to do so by the chair. Please switch off your camera and microphone when you are not speaking, and remember to set your mobile phone to silent for the duration of the meeting. Any views expressed by any of the speakers at the council meeting are the speaker's own, and they do not necessarily reflect the views of the council. Please can council be aware that the webcast will be continued to stream live for 20 seconds after the close of the meeting. This is due to the time delay in transmitting live. I will confirm the names of the remaining members of the committee. Got Vice Chair Councillor Nev Clark, Councillor Dan Capper, Councillor Simon Evans, Councillor Paige Hackin, Councillor Ian Huddleston, Councillor Kev Kirkham, Councillor Chris Payne, Councillor Rachel Quinn, Councillor Peter Roberts, Councillor Jill Scott, and Councillor Cass Island. We'll go to agenda item number 1. Have we had any apologies for absence that we're aware of?
None, Chair.
Okay, so is there any to receive any disclosure of interest at any matters for the committee? I'm assuming we don't have any of them, but I've got to ask. Take that as a no. Anything called in under the agenda item number 3? Any matters referred to the committee under the call-in procedure?
No, Chair.
And to approve the minutes of the previous meeting, which is on page 3 and 4, unless anyone's got any particular griping comments about that, would anyone like to just put their hand up and approve them and then second them for me? Thank you. Got Nev and Rachel. Thank you very much. So we're going to select committee work programme, and that's agenda item number 5, and that's on pages 5 to 6. Get the agenda up. So I think obviously we've got quite a busy year with the report in part 2, and it's going to be dominated by revitalising Buxton, but obviously we've got the growth strategy and various other things that have got to come back as well. So I don't know if you wanted to come in, Andrew, and then obviously you've got Rachel wanting to come in as well on the arrangements.
Yeah, Chair. Obviously, throughout the period through to October, there's going to be sort of 3 key reports for this committee to consider, and this is the first one of those. There'll be one in July and one towards October, Chair.
And we've got the skills agenda that needs to come back, and then we've got the UK SPF update that was meant to be on today, but we don't seem to be on the report. I don't know, is that going to be updated today, Lorraine, or are we going to bring that to the May meeting?
We're going to bring that to the May meeting because the delivery we won't be completing until next week, and we've got the monitoring return to prepare, so we'll be able to give a fuller picture in May when we've done all of that activity to say exactly what projects we've supported and also what the outputs and outcomes of that investment has been. So it'll give a fuller and comprehensive picture to the board rather than now when we're currently still delivering the 2022 to 25 allocation. So we'll be able to bring an update on that and the future programme in May.
And then we've got the parking strategy and supporting local businesses. I'm assuming we're going to look at hopefully getting them to May. Andrew, and then I'll bring you in, Rachel. Sorry.
Yeah, just to be clear, Chair, as well. On the agenda tonight, you've got the consideration of the, if you like, the framework for the council's new growth strategy. So once that we have that engagement tonight, the strategy will be developed in draft for the executive, and an action plan produced, and we intend to bring that back to the next committee once that's completed. and that will have a number of implications for the work programme of this committee, Chair. So again, once we've got that work completed, we'll sit down with you and the Vice Chair and work that through.
Brilliant. Now, Councillor Quinn, sorry to keep you waiting.
It's okay, and it actually does link in with all of that. But I thought we probably could do with an update on the Crescent and what's going on there, and also the Opera House and the future of the University of Derby within Buxton.
Yeah.
And more focus on jobs rather than just housing development, because I think it's housing that's taking us back.
Yeah. Anthony, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Myself and the Chief Executive have met with the University of Derby this afternoon, as it happens. They're in the midst of sort of putting together a scheme that they hope will be able to expand access to some additional sort of training and skills options by working with some of the local schools. They're hoping to have a scheme that they'll be launching in May. So we'll see if we can sort of try and line that up in terms of sort of something for this committee. In terms of the Crescent, in terms of sort of the sort of loan arrangements, etc., we're still awaiting sort of additional updates from the county council. Again, we're expecting to sort of receive them shortly. There's much talking going on between lawyers, so it's costing someone some money at some point. But also sort of the new management and some of the arrangements that they've got in place at the Crescent, they've been changing those to try and sort of make improvements to their current position. So we'll try and get some additional updates on that. And then lastly, in terms of the Opera House, we met with Paul Kerrison, the Chief Exec at the Opera House last week, just as part of a sort of a regular meeting, in a sense, just to go over a couple of bits. We're hoping to be able to make an announcement shortly, and we'll have an individual exec decision setting out some hopeful grant funding that we hope we're lined up to get, which will help to start move things on again in terms of their, well, not quite the grander plans, but in terms of sort of setting out a pathway to how we get towards that. Thanks,
Yeah.
Chair.
Is it worth at some point bringing David Willman in and having him discuss it with the committee once we were at a stage where we formulated the plans down the line? So something that him and Paul could bring back, because obviously he is really good at explaining what he does and how the project's going to go. So I think he'll be really good to bring along to the committee at some point, and I know he'd be keen to.
Chair, obviously sort of the Opera House have got a particularly sort of, they've got varying versions of sort of a grander plan, a sort of medium plan, and a bit of a smaller plan based on sort of what current funding might well be available. We're obviously exploring, particularly through David, as to how we can sort of maximise any opportunities as best as possible. So yeah, it probably will be worthwhile at some point, but that might well be a little bit ahead. And I think Andrew wants to comment as well anyway.
Yeah, just Anthony's covered it, but just to confirm, the council's commissioned Theatre Research and David Wilmore to actually support us in terms of the process as well.
Yeah, and he's really good. I've got a lot of faith in David to deliver that project, because obviously I'm a trustee on the Opera House, so I've got a lot of faith, and he was commissioned by the Opera House before to look at getting the project off the ground. So I think we're getting there with it, which is good. So is anyone else who's got any other comments on the Select programme? I think we can obviously meet offline as well as committee chairs, Rachel, to look at that as well. Okay,
Yes,
great.
Chair.
Brilliant. So we will move on to the growth strategy, and I'm going to bring Damien in first if he wants to say a few words, and then we'll pass to Lorraine, who will go through the presentation that's attached to the website and ModGov.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say, obviously, the existing growth strategy of the council was adopted in 2017. So there is obviously, there's been a lot of things that have changed in the world as well as in the High Peak in that time, and we're well on the way. We've got sort of some of the outline principles which Lorraine will go through. But even from when we started putting this together last year, there's obviously been further changes with the likely local government reorganisation. So it does mean that the emphasis of the growth strategy, I think it's all the more important because I think that the High Peak has a unique economic geography within sort of the East Midlands and in Derbyshire, and I think those are some of the things that we want to bring out in the growth strategy. But obviously, if Lorraine goes through sort of the principles going into it, obviously then input from councils, and we'll take that all on board when we draft up the final strategy with the executive. But over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you. I shall start sharing my screen. So hopefully in a few seconds that'll come through. Okay, so growth strategy. Let me move on to the first slide. Here we go. So just in terms of the structure or proposed structure for the new strategy, as Damien just said, it's a number of years since the last one. The world has changed. The local geography has changed in terms of some of the regional activity with EMCA and again likely to change. But in terms of what some of the key chapters, if you like, or sections within the strategy that we anticipate is around really kind of setting the economic profile, so picking up some of the things that that Damien mentioned. You know, we're in our location and geography as part of Derbyshire, but also as part of the East Midlands Combined Authority now. But also we know, and we've talked about when we come on to some of the economic profile, that we know that a lot of our residents of the High Peak often commute out onto the more western side of the geography into Cheshire East, for example, Tameside and Greater Manchester. Predominantly, I think the data is that a third of our residents commute out into that geography. So again, some strong links and connections that way in terms of employment. So we'll have a look at some slides around the economic profile. So that will draw us to things around what are some of the key challenges and opportunities, some of those drivers. So again, that comes back to some of that national and regional priorities and things that have changed over the last few months with local government reorganisation, which again kind of puts a new spotlight on this type of activity. And the process of re-engaging and updating the growth strategy really is to ensure that we leave and we support our communities in that period of time where we've got, you know, real control over those interventions and leave those communities and assets in the best possible position for the future in terms of growth. And then principles, objectives and missions are some of the kind of key priorities, identifying some constraints to delivery. Again, some of that might be time related in the sense that the local government reorganisation has a time scale attached to that. And then looking at some of what the key interventions might be, some of the key projects and what the delivery mechanisms and ultimately what we want to see at the end and what does success look like. So in terms of the economic profile, we've talked about some of this over the last 12, 18 months when we've taken various different reports to committee. One of the things that we've acknowledged previously around population is that there's been a very small change in population over the census 2011 to 2021, and this is very different to other areas across the country. So in most places the population has gone up, as you can see, nationally by 6.6% and East Midlands by 7.65%, whereas in the High Peak the population effectively has remained static. But what's also interesting is when we look at the age-related elements of the population change, there's been a significant increase in those aged 65 to 74 and a reduction in the residents age between 35 and 49. Again, quite a significant reduction in that age bracket. And we also know, and we've talked about specifically around at Buxton, for example, but in the High Peak generally, that the younger cohort as well, that kind of 18 to 30 bracket, again, that there's a reduction in those age ranges, which then brings us on to the next point around economically active. So again, there are less economically active than there were in 2011. But again, that's not necessarily a surprise, given that there's more older people and they're likely to be retired and therefore not economically active. But what that means, obviously, is that that has a knock-on effect then in terms of levels of productivity, where you've got higher numbers of people who are not economically active or retired. So when we look at productivity in the High Peak, it doesn't fare very well compared to Derbyshire as a whole, but certainly compared to England when you compare those figures. And then again, as I mentioned in the introduction, we know that a large proportion of our residents commute out of the High Peak for work, and that a third of them are commuting into the Greater Manchester geography. And that isn't, again, surprising, given our location within Derbyshire has been at the kind of the northwest of the regional geography and the EMCA geography, and obviously much closer to Greater Manchester than Derby or Nottingham, which are obviously the main cities that form the part of the EMCA cities within the EMCA region. So in terms of businesses, there's been a slight reduction in the number of businesses between the period or a slight reduction since 2020 in the number of businesses. So a large proportion of our businesses are micro businesses, so less than 10 employees, and only 5 businesses employ more than 250 people, which is the lowest in Derbyshire. But we have had increases in certain sectors. So the knowledge economy sector has increased within recent years, and also business formation has dropped in the period of time, so it has reduced, and also business closure rate is actually lower than Derbyshire and England. So again, areas to look at really when we're looking at businesses. So in terms of business formation rate, businesses may start up, but then it's really looking at either the closure rate or survival rate and seeing whether our businesses are managing to survive and thrive. So sometimes the formation rate isn't always the best statistic to look at. We have to look at them all in together holistically and see what that's telling us about our kind of business, the geography in terms of the business area. I think we might just have a hand that I saw pop up. Is that right, Chair?
Yeah, Lorraine, you have. Can I just ask a question? First of all, the proportion of businesses in the knowledge economy, is that a higher proportion because of the fall in the proportion of in the number of other businesses, or actually have we got a real increase in businesses in the knowledge economy? And also the business formation, what kind of businesses are those?
We can take that away as an action and dig down into some of the detail. We've just picked some of the higher kind of higher level statistics, but we can certainly go away and look at that and do some more analysis on that information for you, Councillor Quinn.
Okay, because we could do with knowing. So, for example, if they're like cafes or retail, I mean, the resilience of those businesses isn't great at the moment. So
Yeah,
we could do with assessing which kinds of business are more likely to succeed.
yeah, exactly. And I think that was my point about we need to really look at the formation rate. What types of businesses are there? And in terms of the businesses that are failing, I think you're absolutely right. They are more likely to be potentially in those more higher risk, if you like, business areas or hospitality, leisure related, or that maybe are reliant more on tourism and visitor economy, and can be more difficult and challenging. So certainly we can look at that alongside the business formation, business survival and business closure to understand what sectors or particular types of business are flourishing and which ones in terms of expanding and getting bigger and which ones are finding are struggling in the current climate, so we can really unpick that and understand that.
Okay, thank you.
And then we move on to some information on housing delivery. Now, we've talked about challenges sometimes around housing delivery over the last 18 months. We've got a major project in Buxton that we'll be talking about in our next item. But it's actually quite helpful to look back over the delivery over a kind of extended period of time and see that there have been waves, really, if you like, in terms of delivery. So within that period of time of the last 10 years, the housing target within the local plan is 350 units, homes per annum. And as you can see, we've highlighted here in blue the years where we have exceeded that figure. So 17, 18, 18, 19, and then 21, 22, and 22, 23, where there has been delivery above that target, but the other years there's been delivery which has fallen short of that figure. And again, more recently, we know there are some challenges, particularly things like nutrient neutrality, which will contribute to that under delivery, certainly in the last set of results, and we know that that has had an impact in terms of delivery. But again, it's also interesting to look at the level of affordable housing completions that have taken place, and the figures only started, or certainly the ones that I could access, had started in 2016-17. So again, you can see quite a variety in terms of levels of delivery, from as low as 23 in 1920, but then at a height of 157 in 21-22. Now, some of that might have been in that a lot of units will have got held up through COVID, and maybe in the year sort of 2021 there'll have been a backlog of delivery. But again, just interesting to see how some of that data comes through, and again look to how ways and opportunities that we can deliver and continue to deliver and meet those targets, but also within the context of knowing that the expectation through the revised NPPF planning policy is to increase those housing delivery figures, and therefore we will need to look at ways that we can increase our delivery if we are to meet those enhanced and new targets as part of the local plan review. So again, that will include the approach to allocations and making sure that sufficient sites are identified for housing as well as obviously employment. So in terms of moving on from kind of the statistics, some of what that's telling us in terms of some of our opportunities and challenges. So as we've talked about, the business startup rate has declined. We know that there is a lack of quality enterprise or industrial space for businesses in terms of small to medium-sized businesses. Again, we've talked about in the previous slides that the vast majority of our businesses are micro businesses. So therefore, having the opportunity and the space, and that includes industrial premises, for them to have the opportunity to grow will be really, really important over the coming years. Resident earnings are below county and national levels. So again, that's linked to the people, the jobs that are based within the High Peak are paid less than some of the jobs external to the High Peak. So as I've said earlier, about a vast number of our High Peak residents commute out to Greater Manchester for work. the salaries will be higher in Greater Manchester, and city-based jobs, therefore people are commuting out for higher wages, but being able to live within the High Peak and access that employment because of our proximity to Greater Manchester and the transport links that are connected to that. And obviously housing delivery targets are falling short of the current local plan, and also we will need to look at how we can address that as we look at the new targets within the revised NPPF. So some of that then relates and kind of identifies some of our potential opportunities for the future. So in terms of business support and growth, again, we've spent a lot of UK SPF money over the last 2.5 years, supporting businesses to grow, and we've taken reports to previous committees about that in terms of some of the work that we've done and how, what an impact that's had to local businesses, and we'll provide another update in May. But also looking at how we can support businesses to expand, and looking at how we can either facilitate and enable as a council, bringing forward some of those potential business industrial units that we know are needed. And also, again, linked to population and employment, looking at how we reduce economic inactivity rate. So one of the ways to do that is to ensure that we don't lose our young people to moving out of the area, and that we keep that balanced economy in terms of having people who are economically active in employment, and a range of earning potential, for all of those different categories in terms of types of job, and also qualifications in terms of the types of qualifications that people have got, and making sure that we can, again, it contributes to their earning potential and their employability opportunities in making sure that we can support that, and supporting people to continue to get those higher level of training and development opportunities that will then impact their and increase their income and earning potential. And then in terms of some of the drivers, and touched on these in the introduction, we've obviously got the national context. So the government sets a series of missions. There's also the local government reorganisation, which is underway in and across Derbyshire in our case. And that will, again, potentially affect what we want to focus on within the next 3 years, and kind of look at this as a short, medium-term plan potentially. So we leave the borough in the best possible position in terms of our communities, industrial strategy, and also, as we've already mentioned, the NPPF, which will inevitably bring some challenges in terms of revising our local plan and how we achieve some of those ambitions for growth that have been set by government. And then on a regional platform, we've obviously got the relatively newly formed East Midlands County Combined Authority. They are in the process of setting some regional context around local growth framework, etc., which is still in draft and still developing, and how we can make sure that that those documents and frameworks support the economy of the High Peak and our residents and businesses is really important. And we've also got Visit Peak District, Derbyshire and Derby, and the local visitor economy partnership that launched last year. And again, one of the kind of key priority for the mayor is tourism is proving to be up there as a very high priority for the mayor. And obviously within the High Peak we have a high number of tourist assets, which was borne out in the Tourism Awards last week, where actually a large number of high peak businesses were extremely successful within the regional awards. And then obviously we've got the local government reorganisation, transport plan, and then on a more local level, our own kind of key documents that drive and guide us in terms of our strategies and policies. We've got the corporate plan, the local plan, tourism strategy and climate change. So again, growth strategy will look to all of those to ensure that we're complying with and meeting the priorities that those documents set out. And then in terms of some of the key principles, and these again probably won't come as any surprise, we've talked about the importance of inclusive growth, being able to ensure that every facet of our community can benefit from the growth strategy. So it's not about making the rich richer, it's about giving opportunities for everybody at every level of society and supporting people who are economically disadvantaged. And in terms of access to employment and skills, even at the most basic level, as well as the higher earners and people wanting to expand and their skill base and qualifications. And again, that focuses on social value in terms of how we approach that in all of our contracts and how we deliver our own activity. And supporting social enterprise, which again, we've done a lot of support and activity through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund around that. And then in terms of green growth, obviously supporting our the climate and low carbon industries and looking at net gain. Again, we've done activity through UK Shared Prosperity Fund that supports these activities. I think I just saw a hand pop up. I'm not sure if somebody did.
It was just me. I was just going to mention the local nature strategy as well that wasn't mentioned on the previous screen, but I mean it sort of comes in the biodiversity net. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No, that's fine. We can clarify that and make sure it's not missed. But yeah, it was probably the intention was that it was covered within the biodiversity net gain wider strategy, but we can add that one in for completeness.
Okay, thank you.
And then after that, we've got obviously, again, we've talked before about the importance of good quality design, and also lots of our towns and rural areas have a real focus on heritage buildings. So again, making sure that that's reflected in the quality of design that comes forward. And we've talked about that in relation to the Buxton scheme most recently. And really looking at that place-based regeneration. And again, we've focused funding, particularly again through UK Shared Prosperity and Rural England funding, on supporting activities around place-based regeneration, and through the Heritage Action Zone in terms of investing in our heritage assets, either our own or supporting private businesses to improve the heritage aesthetic nature of some of their buildings, as well as making them future proof and fit for the future, and increase and improve their longevity. And again, we've talked about sustainability in terms of economic and social sustainability, so looking at growth, but also sustainable communities. And again, coming back to that inclusive growth and making sure that we've got opportunities for everybody to thrive. But also in terms of financial sustainability, obviously growth in terms of housing growth or business growth also brings in council tax and business rates to the council, which is really important to the council's financial sustainability moving forward. And then in terms of some of the key objectives and missions, we've talked about, oh, I think has Godfrey got your hand up? I think I just spotted something pop up.
Thanks, Lorraine. Sorry, can I just ask, is the presentation that you're giving at the moment, particularly the stats, do they relate to the local plan area or the borough as a whole?
The stats, did you say?
Well, the stats and I mean, obviously, then the points that you build on the stats later on in the as when you arrive at where you are now in the presentation. But I'm not clear whether we're talking about the local plan area or the borough as a whole. Because if it's the borough as a whole, then there's a whole section of the borough that we can't do anything about.
Yeah. So in terms of the general statistics, population, employment, my understanding is that they're the borough statistics. Where there might be a difference in terms of delivery, our delivery figures have come from our planning documentation around our annual monitoring reports, which would relate, I expect, just to the area of which we have planning authority control. Does that answer the question?
Well, a little, but for example, the housing figures and the completion figures, are they for the borough as a whole or just for the local plan area?
So my understanding is because they've come from High Peak Borough Council's annual monitoring report, it is which is a planning document, they will relate to the local plan geography rather than the whole of the High Peak. So they won't take into account, because the Peak District National Park will produce its own report with those figures in. So we don't, otherwise I've only used our figures. They may well include within that documentation what the delivery is within the national park area.
Yeah, my point is, Lorraine, that the impression that's given by the figures may be absolutely accurate or distorted depending on the area that we're looking at. So, for example, the population figures. If we're taking an aging population, which I have accepted that. I mean, I've had that figure, or I've had those figures for some time now, and I've accepted that. But it could well be that if they're for the borough as a whole, then it includes the national park area, where there definitely is a much older population. And also in terms of startups and closures, if we're not talking about like areas all the way through, then these figures and the conclusions we draw from these figures might be incorrect.
I think we can certainly take that away to look at, but I think the only element where the figures, they will be borough-wide figures for the whole of the High Peak for things like demography, population, employment, etc. The only differentiation from that is where we're talking about physical delivery, where it will only include, but we can go away and see if we can add into those tables what the Peak District National Park delivery was for those housing outputs, so that the full picture is there, because that data will be retrievable.
I'll just make one more point, and then you obviously need to get on. But for me, we should go the other way, because the only levers that we've got really relate to the area of the local plan. We don't have any levers at all in relation to how we deliver against some of the conclusions in this presentation in the national park, and they will all be lower. So business startups will be lower. if we're allocating sites, we're not in a position to allocate industrial sites in the national park. It seems to me that we should be talking about a constant area in everything that we report now in relation to the growth strategy, and that area should be the local plan area, because that's the only area where that we can really make any significant difference to. I'll shut up now.
Lorraine, we've got
you.
Rachel as well, Councillor Quinn.
Hi, we do have quite a disparity in terms of the High Peak, not just in the national park. For example, the population of Buxton has fallen since 2001 and has fallen marginally since 2011. And the number of older people, retired people in couples, it is much greater there than it is, for example, in Glossop. And there's also disparity in terms of where people work. It's not the same across the whole borough. And when we look at employment, there's a big difference in terms of quite a few people from Buxton might work in the quarries. I mean, they've been laying people off lately, but that is the well-paid employment that is in that area, and that has repercussions when you think about whether jobs are green or not. Likewise, you'll find that tourist jobs are different in different parts of the High Peak, and that is really significant. In terms of Buxton, it's not really housing that turns young people away, because our housing prices are much cheaper than they are in Manchester. It's the lack of employment. And housing is tending to actually bring in those affluent retirees. So they're kind of doing the opposite from what we want to do. The other thing about the tourism or business economy is it's a low wage economy. So if we want to do something about the job opportunities and the earning potential of people in the area, then we've got to offer something that is vastly different from the tourist economy. So we do need to actually look specifically at the figures. They are available. Most of them are on the census, and we have actually discussed them at the local plan meeting as well.
Thank you. Yes, we do have data as well around things like number of jobs in the tourism sector and how they break down. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Quinn, that a lot of the tourism jobs will be of a kind of lower wage or often 0-hour contracts in some instances. So again, are not necessarily supporting the higher employment. I think we've got somebody else's hands gone.
Councillor Sliceland. And then Councillor Clough, are you coming back in as well?
Please.
I'll let Kath go first.
Yeah. I don't know how you can stop young people moving out of the area. The ones that aren't moving out of the area, need help with upskilling. And I don't know how this council can do that. I also don't know how this council can create jobs. There isn't the land. So, a lot of this is talking about things we have absolutely no control over at all. And that concerns me. Thank you.
I think in relation to things like jobs or skills, I appreciate as a borough council we don't have responsibility for education and adult skills, etc. But through our UK Shared Prosperity funding, we have supported a number of interventions that are supporting people with employability skills. So there is work that we have funded through UK Shared Prosperity and through local organisations that are designed to support people into employment who've either not been in employment before, whether that's young people or older people, middle-aged people. We have done that, and we will bring the data on some of that in terms of the positive outcomes and that we've been able to support through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund when we come back in May with a report on that. So there are things that we can do in that sphere that we're not necessarily, as a council, the kind of regulatory provider for, if you like, that we support, and certainly MCA has responsibilities and budgets around skills agenda.
I welcome that, but I think I think we're very limited in what we can do regarding employment and you know, young people moving away, because that's what they do. They go to universities in other areas and they find jobs in other areas. But thank you.
Andrew, did you want to come in before Godfrey on that point?
Yeah, just to confirm what Lorraine said a little more, really. The growth strategy is not just about what the council does, it's about its enabling function. You know, delivering growth in the High Peak involves multi-agency, including investment from national agencies and regional agencies like Homes England and MCA. So it's about identifying those issues that you're pointing out, Councillor Sizeland and others, and actually doing the best for High Peak with those agencies.
Councillor Claff.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to emphasise the point I was trying to make before, because I think Rachel perhaps got the wrong end of it. This document is not an academic document. It's a major tool in terms of trying to create better opportunities for employment, better opportunities for growing the economy of the area. And we can only use the local plan in the local plan area. And the local plan is the main tool that the council has for actually increasing employment and increasing economic opportunity. And it seems to me, Lorraine, that in some respects, we're not measuring like we'd like. And I strongly believe we should not be in any of the figures that we've got and in any of the projections we're making, we shouldn't be including the national park area. We should be talking about only the local plan area.
We'll take that away for consideration internally, because I'm not sure how easy it is to do that, but we can certainly look at that, because from a corporate point of view, in our annual reports, we present data and figures in a particular way, and whether it would require any changes to that. Andrew's got his hand up, so he might want to speak on that particular point.
I was just going to add, really, I take exactly the point you're making, Councillor Claff. But I suppose, again, it's not just about the housing and employment delivery. I mean, when we produce the action plan, there'll be a significant amount of actions that are around the local plan, which your point's completely valid for all of that. But when we start looking at skills interventions and the sort of wider things, the wider enablers for growth, we certainly want to include the national park area and work in conjunction with the national park around those things. And again, as I said in the answer to Councillor Sizeland's point, these things won't be necessarily about the council having a direct role. It's more like an enabling lobbying role to get the best for High Peak. So, but again, your point's completely valid around housing delivery, employment delivery, to be honest with you, but it won't just be about that.
Yeah. I'm going to bring in Councillor Payne, but I do think as well that we should be aware, obviously, the second part 2 report is about redeveloping a massive part and bringing in different generations of people and hopefully bringing in different sorts of employment to Buxton as well. So I think we've got lots of positives to go on as well, and I think the team are doing a really good job on things like that, and the redevelopment of Glossop Market Hall, investment in buildings, whereas some councils are just selling off buildings and getting rid of them left, right and centre. So I do think we are an outwardly mobile council and invested in and helping to grow the economy as well. So Councillor Payne, I'll bring you in, and then Councillor Hacking.
Yeah, just a couple of observations. I seem to remember when we were having this discussion last year, the points that Godfrey was raising about, market towns and towns close to national parks was a subject that we discussed at that point as well. It's, you know, how well can you do when you're so much of your geography is taken up by a national park, and as sort of Kath indicated, there's not masses of amounts of land around for industrial sites. Having said that, I do think that the local plan, we do need to sort of allocate some space for that. But I sort of remember that last time we had this discussion, we said we were going to try and find somewhere that was a good proxy for the High Peak, you know, somewhere similar that's sort of market towns, bit of industrial area. Whether or not you could find somewhere with quarrying, I'm not entirely certain, just to get some sort of sense of, you know, is this the best you can do when you are basically reliant on a number of industries that you sort of find in these tourist areas. The quarrying's been going on for centuries, so that's something that's almost like an anchor. But do you end up then having to sort of concede that you are in effect a commuter area into a larger economic zone like Manchester, like Sheffield? And there's plenty of other places in the country that are like this. You know, you think about bits of the Yorkshire Dales where economically they're tied to Leeds, or places on the south coast like Lewes where they're economically tied to London or Brighton. What do you do by learning from others? And does it become about transport links? Does it become about making sure, for example, that when you're looking at local plan housing, you're building more sort of 1 and 2 bedroom properties closer to railway stations and transport links to help younger people who might be working in Manchester to travel in? My last observation, and this is not scientific at all, this is just me door knocking, right? So I've recently been door knocking on Carr Road Estate and the new estates up near the Aldi in Buxton. And what I'm struck by is the number of single people living in a 3-bedroom house. And they're not all retired people. A lot of them are younger people knocking around in a 3-bedroom house. So there's a bit of me wonders whether or not in the end you have to concede that you are a bit of a commuter area for some of the, you know, more dynamic economic zones such as Sheffield and Manchester. And then you must make it easy for people to do that, to travel back into those areas, because a lot of our young people are moving into Manchester. Now, I'd contend if the train was 45 minutes from Buxton to Manchester, given Rachel's point about housing being cheaper in Buxton, I think a lot of people would stay. But I'm not sure we're strategically setting ourselves up for that type of thinking, and also looking at other places in the country that experience this type of dynamic. Anyway, that's it. Sorry, Chair. I rambled on a little bit there.
Paige, do you want to come in? Or Andrew, do you want to come back first before Paige comes in?
Come back at the end, Chair. If you know
Okay, no worries. Paige.
Yeah. I was just thinking that it might be worth promoting jobs that people can do online, and raising awareness and upskilling on that, making sure that we've got the connections. People can train to do jobs online. Yeah, because if we're limited by land and the availability of land, then we have to be able to think outside the box and go, well, what can people do that doesn't require the land, and how can we promote those opportunities?
Yeah.
Especially the young people, because we love being on our phones and our tech. Okay, all right.
I think it's really good, and to mention that Page, because of the fact that we did the visit to the Capital Centric buildings in Manchester, and they've got workout spaces where people can go and book rooms, they can go and use the working areas, and that's the sort of thing that is probably the future for the High Peak as well, is encouraging small setups in the new Buxton redevelopment, and that's hopefully going to come through. And they can be, if that can be promoted, I think that will really grow the High Peak and bring in people of working age into the High Peak, because they can have the best of both worlds. I don't know if you want to come back with more on that, Andrew, or...
Yeah, I think Councillor Harkins mentioned one of the things I was going to mention in response to Councillor Payne's point around, High Peak's a beautiful area to locate and work, and I think the modern world of working at home provides a big opportunity. The only other thing I was just going to say, and I recall Councillor Payne's note about the discussion we had at the last meeting. I think that there's lots of sort of examples of proxies, but I think one of the most similar things that we know a lot about is Staffordshire Moorlands, actually, and many of the issues that we're discussing here are not exactly the same, but similar challenges for Staffordshire Moorlands. I think, the difficulty, I suppose, the one difficulty with Staffordshire Moorlands that we haven't had as much of, I know Lorraine touched on that we haven't quite reached our sort of housing delivery targets in the local plan. Staffordshire Moorlands have fell well short of theirs, to be honest with you. So, again, some of the considerations that Staffordshire Moorlands as a council is having to make in their growth strategy are very similar to ours. But the points noted about other areas that Councillor Payne mentioned.
Great, thanks. Lorraine, shall we continue with the presentation?
Yeah, so I'll move on to this is just a little bit more detail on those objectives and missions. So one of the things we've talked about is housing delivery. We've done, on some years we've delivered at the target, but overall we're falling short. And obviously if that target goes up, which is what the NPPF is proposing, then that challenge will become even greater to deliver housing delivery, but also the need and the acceptance that the level of affordable and social housing or specialist housing, given that we're an older demography and an aging demographic, that we also need to really look at having the right accommodation for our demographic in the future. So making sure that there is either a degree of flexibility around that in terms of adaptability, or that it's meeting the needs of current and future generations. Then in terms of employment growth, we've acknowledged some of the challenges around that in terms of the right space and the right opportunities and sites to identify. As part of the local plan, we will need to continue to work on that in terms of identifying new sites that we can bring forward, or actually looking at ones that are maybe stalled and haven't been delivered, and what we can do, as Andrew said, around that facilitation and enabling role, and whether that's levering in funding, brownfield or other through the region or nationally to help us do that. And then obviously town centres have been a focus and will continue to be in terms of wanting to support and our town centres to thrive as a kind of hub locally through any development of master plans, etc., and also town centre partnerships. I think we've got another hand up there, Chair.
Yeah, I was about to say we've got another hand up, Councillor Quinn.
Yeah, hello. In my experience, the reason why housing development stalls is because developers can't make a profit from it, and they can't make a profit because there isn't demand, or there isn't effective demand. So we can push sites, we can do whatever we want, but there's a big danger that we might end up with loads of half-completed sites, sort of derelict houses that nobody's buying, and that's going to worry me in terms of the development, the capital and centric development as well. Actually, we need to look very carefully at the housing that we're building. It can't just be whatever. Chris was saying, in terms of the people that we've got, I would suggest that actually what we need is loads of accommodation for elderly people, and that's not what we're getting. We're getting houses that are going to have one person in them or whatever, or we're getting houses that people just aren't going to buy and maybe aren't even going to be finished, and that's concerning me a little bit.
Councillors, do you want to come back, Lorraine, or do you want Councillor Scott to come in and then?
No, we can pick them up feedback after Councillor Scott if that's easier, Chair.
Yeah, go on, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thank you. I found it a really fascinating presentation, so thank you for this, Lorraine, and also the conversation around it. The thing that strikes me, and this is pretty much kind of based on experience in Hayfield, in terms of like empty properties or improving kind of vacant buildings, that quite a few of the buildings would be very expensive to renovate, to bring up to standard. Some of them are listed buildings, and so we've, for example, in the centre of Hayfield, we've got the Royal Hotel, which is a Grade 2 Georgian listed building, but massively expensive to put a new roof on, to do things for. So I don't know what happens about all these kind of beautiful buildings that have gone into disrepair that people just can't afford to bring back into use, and that has an impact on, obviously, on sort of regeneration. So I don't know again what as a council we can do, because things like the UK Shared Prosperity grants wouldn't be big enough for these, and obviously you've got projects like the Glossop Halls, but there are smaller projects that need large amounts of money. So what can we do as a council to support communities when that kind of thing happens?
So I'll come back, Chair, on both of those. I suppose the answer to both of those scenarios or conundrums, to a large extent, is public sector investment. So, for example, if for schemes that either the main reason that often schemes don't come forward for delivery, or you get sites that are allocated for housing and don't get delivered, is because it's, as Councillor Quinn had said, they're not viable. There's either or they're not. There's a market failure. So effectively, it costs more to build the property than that property is worth in the open market, and that's often where public sector funding comes in, because that demonstrates market failure, and effectively that's where the public sector would fund the viability gap. And there's been a number of projects I've been involved in over the last 15 years where that is the approach, and that certainly is the approach that happens with lots of housing or other types of schemes, where effectively they will plug the gap to bring it forward to delivery. I think it's slightly different in terms of the more problematic empty properties that are becoming more derelict, particularly if they're of a heritage or historic nature, because again, it comes down to often funding through Heritage England, Historic England rather, or heritage funding. So the Heritage Action Zone being an example where we received £1 million, but actually that was the council. We received that in grant. What that brought in was probably 3.5 to 4 times more than that in private sector match funding. So we gave maybe 60 or 70,000 pounds to a private property owner towards some of the units along Spring Gardens. So there's the Fitzgerald's Bakery, and for those of you that are familiar with Buxton High Street and the High Street along Spring Gardens, there are a number of properties where we put in maybe up to £200,000, but then the private owner brought in money of their own as well. So actually what was £1 million council or Historic England money ended up being £4 million of investment along that high street, which hasn't necessarily brought new buildings back into use, but it's made the appearance of those buildings and actually future-proofed them in terms of, you know, new windows and reintroducing some of those lost historic elements. And that would be the same type of approach in terms of trying to bring into use other long-term empty properties that, as you say, again, the point is the same about market failure. nobody's going to spend £300,000 bringing it into use if they're not going to get a return on that investment. And where the public sector can and should and does support is in meeting that gap. And that's what I would perceive to be the solution to those types of scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I read somewhere that the council's been allocated some money to look at green belt sites, bringing them into use. Could you give me a bit more detail about that, please?
I think I might have to defer to those that are more knowledgeable on planning, but I understand we have received some funding for a green belt review, I believe.
Yeah.
So Anthony's just put his camera on, so it might be that he's got some more specifics. I'm not sure how much it is and what the timeframes are, but I know our planning colleagues have secured that funding because we've got it on both High Peak and Staffordshire Moorland side, I understand.
Chair, yeah, I suspect Godfrey will probably have more details as the planning portfolio holder. But from a brief conversation with, I want to say Adrian in the planning team, but I don't think it is Adrian. Alistair, sorry. Alistair in the planning team this morning. We've been awarded 70,000 to be able to conduct a review of the green belts as part of the local plan review. So when the local plan group meets, I think in a fortnight or so, I suspect there'll be an update report to that in terms of what we'll be looking at with the money. From the brief conversation that I had this morning, the likelihood is we'll be looking at doing the work within our own team, and it'll be reported back through the local plan working group.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Did anyone else want a question, or should we get Lorraine to move on to the next part? Or Councillor Clough, do you want to come in on the planning question?
Yeah, the government has actually weakened the ability to build on Greenbelt. The essential thing to remember is that Greenbelt is not about protection of the countryside. Greenbelt was the notion of Greenbelt was established to stop urban areas from merging together, and I think there is no doubt that in the current local plan coming up, we will be building on Greenbelt, because the number of sites that would be available for the number of houses that we will have to build, which is currently at the government's reckoning, I think it's 560 a year. There isn't, as Kath said, there isn't enough land in High Peak, but there is a lot of land in High Peak, and Greenbelt will be built on. However, there is another designation, if you look at the current local plan, which is countryside, and the countryside designation has been strengthened. So those areas that have been designated for countryside protection will not be built on. Greenbelt is more vulnerable. I'm not saying that all the Greenbelt will disappear, because it won't, particularly those areas that border on the national park. They definitely will not be built on. But there are areas of, no, not the national park, that border on the national park.
Yeah, no,
but the Greenbelt as a whole will be much more vulnerable.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay, Lorraine, do you want to continue?
Yeah, so in terms of the next set of objectives and missions, we've got a tourism strategy that was adopted a couple of years ago, and we've been working on that over the last few years. We've got a tourism partnership forum set up, but again working on making sure that we convert really some of the day visitors into overnight stay, because that's where there is a greater economic impact. So currently the economic impact of tourism across the High Peak, well, in 2023 was £330 million for the year. But if converting some of those day visitors into overnight visitors could have a significantly positive impact in terms of that economic impact. So looking at opportunities to do that. And rural economy, again, we've talked a lot about the diversity really of our geography in terms of the towns versus the much more rural areas, and really looking at how we can support those rural areas, whether it's through access to employment and or business opportunities. And the rural economy money, we had £400,000 that supplemented the UK Shared Prosperity, was focused just on those specific rural areas. Again, we've talked about business support, and we've funded a lot through regional as well as local UK Shared Prosperity programmes. But again, building on that really, and really trying to look at how we can strengthen those relationships with some of our larger employers and what opportunities they have in the future in terms of their skills development and employment kind of moving forward. And then comes as no surprise that there are often constraints to delivery, and some of which we've been debating throughout the course of this conversation. So things around public transport connectivity, so that kind of that physical connectivity and links, green infrastructure as well as social infrastructure. There's also developer contributions through the planning process, which can and should hopefully help, if not and not hinder delivery. We've talked a lot about land supply being a major constraint in terms of do we have the land, is it in the right place for what's needed, and again that's it's working with what we've got and how we can facilitate and enable that delivery, and look at how best to use our land and assets. Inward investment, again, for all of the reasons we've talked about, can be a challenge. So in terms of, major employers relocating to the High Peak, we haven't necessarily got the land, but again, picking up on some of the comments from Councillor Hacking earlier around, well, actually the way people work and the way people's relationship with work, and often some people being more home-based than maybe looking at opportunities for that, as well as physically employers coming in and relocating in the area, and how we market the High Peak in terms of a place to invest. And strategic partnerships. I think, as Andrew said earlier, the growth strategy is not about 100% to do with what the council, what the things that the council can deliver itself. It's about working with others and in partnership to deliver some of these priorities in collaboration with others, whether that's within the borough or whether that's on a wider geographical platform. And then in terms of the ways that we can, or the ways we can intervene and what activity we can do when things that are more directly in our control. A number of these are related to the local plan, so looking at allocations review, so making sure that sites that are allocated have got the best chance of being delivered, and that are developable in that sense. Through the local plan review, obviously there'll be a site allocations review, but also looking at a approach to developer contributions. And again, other things that we've talked about is how we can use our own assets. So to the extent where we have land, or land that is adjacent and available, how we can work and collaborate as joint ventures, etc., with others to bring that forward, and explore those opportunities, so we can maximise the use of our land. So as an example, we have a number of sites, then we've got an option where we could potentially just sell them and hope that somebody delivers them, or actually do we take an approach like we're taking at Buxton, where we engage with a partner for them to deliver alongside us, so that we know that that site's going to come forward for delivery and not just sit, you know, with a developer buying it and sit on it for another 5 or 10 years and actually not bring it forward, when the important element for us is the delivery and the benefits that that brings, not just from a housing and employment point of view, but also in terms of council tax and business rates. And then looking at kind of master plans locally of what we can and need to do to support our towns. And we've already mentioned, obviously, employment sites and trying to bring sites forward, or look at sites where there could be room for expansion and growth for local businesses. So I won't go through in too much. This is just an extra layer of detail really on some of this, but effectively our main towns and looking at master plans, looking at economic land needs assessment, also all the elements that are involved in the local plan review, so that kind of evidence gathering and market, understanding the market and the context and site availability. And then looking at moving on to kind of delivery and how we would deliver this, that again, it's a mixed economy in terms of how we bring this activity forward. Obviously, we've got member leadership through the leader and deputy leader, an executive support member, through officers, myself and Andrew. Excuse me. But then we've also got this committee where we often bring us reports to and act as a sounding board and getting views in terms of a steer of how we move things forward, and also, you know, things like prioritising or looking at potential pipeline of projects, etc. I think it is important that we, as part of this, develop an action plan and then look at what are the priorities in the next, you know, in the first 12 months, and then in the 2 years that follow, around things that we can really focus on and try and drive forward. And again, we talked as well about that kind of prospectus or place marketing. How do we showcase what the High Peak has got to offer, and really so we can stand out in terms of investment opportunities. And in terms of that partnership piece and engaging with wider partners, we've obviously got relationships with networks of registered providers, social housing landlords that we work with and have good relationships with. We've got the planning forum, again looking at ways in the future that reviewing the local plan. Our relationships with employers, again, I think that over the years that's ebbed and flowed, and particularly there was a focus around COVID of re-engaging with businesses, but certainly as through our UK shared prosperity work, I think we've identified a need to you know, continue to do that and build on those relationships. And there's various, you know, national organisations as well as regional, like Homes England and the East Midlands Chambers, etc., and at various different groups and boards that myself and Andrew and others form part of, that we can look at in terms of that delivery mechanism moving forward. And then the why. Why are we doing all of this? Again, we talked about the benefits to our communities in terms of opportunities, but also delivery in terms of housing and employment will bring in council tax and business rates, so it brings income, additional income, and supports the viability and sustainability of the council. But it's also about looking at you know, increasing population and keeping more younger people within the demographic, but also looking at that supply of housing, entrepreneurship, visitor spend. Again, I'd mentioned the impact that has in terms of overnight stays and how that can have a really positive impact by just changing some day visitors into overnight visitors. I think triples the amount of spend. And again, coming back to that impact on communities, that local pride. And I think, Chair, that is the last slide. So that concludes the report on the growth strategy. If anybody's got any additional questions.
No, I think we're very comprehensive. I think we've had a very good debate about the growth strategy, and I think we've got a lot of positives. I mean, like I said, we're very much of an outward going council. We're not a inward looking council. We're not selling off assets like other councils are doing. We're investing and regenerating assets such as Glossop Town Hall. We're redeveloping the Spring Shopping Centre. So we've got a lot of things going for us. Like other councils are just selling things off left, right, and centre, like the Buxton Museum, for example. So I think we are very, very positive, and I think the growth strategy is there. But obviously, there's always room for improvement with everything we do. If no one else has got any comments, I'm quite happy to note the presentation, and we'll move to the next agenda item, which is any questions for the executive member. I'm assuming we don't have any.
None, Chair.
Okay, so we're going to move to agenda item number 8, excluding the press and public. Would you be able to stop the recording and the live broadcast now for us, Rachel?